Hello, I'm Ross, I work at Rive, and today we're going to be going through the Layouts feature. I'm going to start off really simple, and we're going to work our way up to a full project. Let's get started. So, to begin with, let's create a text layer. And now I'm going to wrap this text layer in a layout. You have three options. One is layout selection, like that. Another option is to right-click and wrap in a layout. And the final option is Shift-L, the shortcut. So the most obvious thing that has happened is we have our text layout and we have our text inside it. Let's go through some of the settings. You'll see here that it says hug x hug. What does this mean? Well, it basically means that the text layout is hugging the width of the text layer, and it's also hugging the height of the text layer, which means that if I was to change the text run to something smaller, the text layout itself shrinks as well. But the text layout doesn't need to hug. It can also have a fixed width, and you can set that just as a pixel amount. It can also have a fixed height. You can see that the text is centered horizontally, but not vertically. Let's see why. Basically, what's happening is when you wrap a text box in a text layout, that box size is now being entirely controlled by the layout. So if I try to change the size of the text box, it snaps back into place. The only way to change the size of the text box now is to change the size of the layout. So, since the position of the text is at the top, and in a text layout you don't actually get to control the position of your child layout, that means the reason that this text is at the top has nothing to do with layouts, it's entirely to do with the text layer settings. We have it set to align to the center, but we don't have it set to align to the middle. We can highlight the layout, change the size, and it will always remain in the center. But for this example, I do actually want to hug the width and hug the height of the text. I'm going to go into my assets and drag in an image piece. And so what happens if I wrap this image in a layout? Shift L. We have an image layout. Now you can see down here it says 36 by 36. It does not say hug. Let's go up here and see why. By default, when you wrap an image in a layout, the layout has a fixed height and a fixed width, and you do not get the option to hug the image. Now, there's a bunch of reasons why image layouts cannot be set to hug. I'm not going to go into them now, but it's just something to keep in mind. Image layouts cannot hug, group layouts cannot hug, and artboard layouts cannot hug. The things that can be hugged are text, vector images, and other layouts, which means that these two layouts can be highlighted and wrapped in their own layout. Shift L. And the first thing that you'll notice is it's hug x hug, which is great. This is exactly what we want, but you might notice something else. When you wrap one or more layouts within another layout, that layout will either be a row or a column. This is usually determined by the initial position of the layouts before they're wrapped. These two layers were next to each other, so when we wrap them in their own layout, we automatically got a row. We can also wrap them in a column, but for now we actually do want a row. You can see that Rive set an automatic horizontal gap between all the elements within this layout. Now, to get to this point, I've been showing you that you need to wrap your image in a layout, wrap your text in a layout, and then wrap those two in another layout to create a row. However, I've only been doing this really to show you the different types of layouts. So I've just unwrapped my layers. I have the original text layer and the original image layer. All you have to do really is just highlight your layers, no matter what they are, Shift L, and then Rive has automatically wrapped your layers in their own respective layouts and created a row. Now, you might be able to see from the text layout, but both elements are actually aligned to the top left. We can change the alignment of the child layouts by just clicking here. And now both elements are actually aligned to the center of the row. You can see this if I change the width. It automatically changes from hug to a fixed width. Just to show you, the elements within the row have been aligned to the center. Set this back to hug. And I want another piece of text, so I'm just going to highlight the text layout, duplicate, drag it below the image, and you can see that the row has reordered. And now I can open up the text, run, and type some more text. And because the text layout is hugging the text layer within, the text layout has increased in size. This affects the width of the row layout, which is hugging the total width and height of the three contained layouts. So now we know the basic rules of layouts. Let's make some cool stuff. I'm going to call this row greeting row. I want to set up my artboard for a desktop. The width should be at least 1200. I'm going to zoom out and just make the height quite big so we have a lot of space. I can now see that if this was a website, this text is actually quite small. So I'm going to go into each bit of text and change the font size, I don't know, to 50. Now I want to increase the size of the image, but if I go into this image and try to scale it up, nothing happens. This is because images get locked to the size of the layout. So all we need to do is increase the size of the width and the height by an equal amount. 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. Now I'm going to take this greeting row layout and wrap it in another layout. Shift L, and this has created another row. I actually want this to be called viewport, and I want my viewport to fill the entire artboard. I want my viewport to be my highest level layout, which contains all other layouts. So let's use a sizing option that we haven't used so far, which is fill, which doesn't seem to be available. This is because we are using absolute positioning, but if we just switch this off, you can see that the child layout is now aligned to the top left. Let's not touch that right now. I just want to make sure that the viewport fills the width and height of the entire artboard. This viewport layout is currently set to a row. We want it to be a column so that when I create a child layout, it goes immediately below my greeting row. I'm going to call this layout logo layout and put it above the greeting row because I want my logo to be at the top. Then I'm going to change the height of the logo layout to a fixed amount, and I'm going to get rid of the background color. I'm going to duplicate the logo layout and rename this one greeting layout. And now I can drag my greeting row into my greeting layout, change the layout to center the child layouts. Now I'm just going to grab my logo from one of my old files. Here I have my logo. I press play, it's interactive. Click artboard, copy, and paste. And now all I need to do is nest that artboard like that. Now I know that I cannot just put a nested artboard into a layout. I first have to give it its own layout. So Shift L, and that creates an artboard layout. It has a fixed width and a fixed height. Just like I said before, you cannot hug an artboard, but I can change the width and height and go into the artboard and just change the position so it's kind of the right size. And I'm just going to call this logo, and then I'm going to drag this logo into our top layout, and I can center this logo by changing the alignment here. And so if I highlight the artboard, everything stays centered. And if I tap tab to load up animate mode, press play, then the animation works, the interactivity works, everything works exactly as it did in the other file. I actually want to change the text color to black, and I want to change the artboard background to white. Cool, now I'm going to create a button. Button front. Button back. There we go. Some text. Hi. Center it in the button. Group these three layers. Command G. Call this button group. And now with the viewport highlighted, I'm going to create another child layout. Call this button layout. Zoom out. Once again, it's filling the width of the viewport, but I'm going to change the height to a fixed height and delete the background. Now, I can't just drag this button group into this button layout because the button group isn't a layout itself. So Shift L, and I'll call this button child layout. But now, because this is a layout, I can drag it into the button layout. And of course, it's aligned to the top left, so I can just align it to the center. And if we highlight the artboard once again, we can change the width and everything stays centered. And no matter what size it is, you can press play and the interactivity will work. And now, finally, we can add some content. So for my content, I actually want 4 boxes that contain animations. Just going to draw my first box as a rectangle around the corners. Change the color to a, I don't know, turquoise. And then I'm going to grab an animation from an old project. Here I have my old projects. It's a walk cycle, ready to go. Bish bash bosh. Copy the artboard and paste. Okay, and going to move this a bit closer to the other artboards, just so I know where it is. And then we highlight this artboard, nested artboard, walk. Then I'm going to group these 2 layers together, Command G, and call this item 1. And I can move my nested artboard up into place. Actually, let's change the color to a linear gradient. Do a turquoise at the bottom and then a blue at the top. Press play. Shrink a little bit, just about 10%, and a bit lower. See how that looks. Okay, cool. Shift L to convert it into a layout. We can see that the bounding box is actually too big. We want it to just fit the actual size of the box, and we can manually change the size, which pushes down our box, but that's okay because we can open up the layout and just move the box up and then manually change that bottom one. There we go. Call this item 1 layout, and I'm going to highlight viewport and create a new child layout. Lift up the bottom and we'll call this new section content. Then if we drag our item 1 layout into content, content will convert into a row. I'm going to align it to the top center and I'll get rid of the background color. Now I'm going to go into content and just duplicate 2, 3, and then in the content settings, I will set the row to wrap. That way, when we change the width of the artboard, the items rearrange dynamically. In the content settings, I'm going to add a horizontal gap and a vertical gap. We can actually add a little bit of animation to this, so highlight content and then go to layout animation, plus, custom, easy ease, ease in, and make it like 300 milliseconds or something. Then highlight all of the items, layout animation, plus, and just inherit. That way they will all inherit the animation that we've set for their parent. And now when we change the artboard width, you can see that they dynamically rearrange. I actually want a little bit of a gap between the button and the content, so I'm going to highlight viewport, add child layout, just call this gap, and I'll place it in between the button layout and the content. Then I will decrease that size and get rid of the background. And now if I open animate mode, I press play, my animations play, this is interactive. Oh yes, before I forget, one last bit of design, highlight viewport, and then we will add another final child layout. And I'll call this layout footer. I'll change the background to black, and I will change it to a fixed height. Let's add some text. Get in touch. Ross at rive.app. Shift L to wrap that text in its own text layout. It's set to hug, that's exactly what we want. Drop it into the footer layout and then highlight the footer layout and align the contents to the center. Now, because this is the footer of my website, I actually want the artboard height to be there. And now let's see what happens when I resize the artboard. The content extends down over the footer. Why is this? Well, it's because my content layout has a fixed height when it should be set to hug. Let's add another gap in between the content and the footer. I will adjust the artboard height again. So now what happens when I adjust the width of my artboard? It plops down and the footer remains beneath the content. However, you may notice that the artboard height itself is not changing. How do I make it so that when I reach this breakpoint, the artboard increases in size to the same as the viewport? So the artboard would go from 1489 all the way down to 2274. How? How do I animate the height of the artboard? Well, it's quite simple. But first of all, we need to actually be able to control the width of the artboard whilst the animation is playing, which is something we can't currently do. How do we do this? With a blend state. So the first thing to do is create a timeline and set a keyframe for the width of the artboard. And I'll just call this timeline width 1425 because that's what we're at. Then I'm going to duplicate this timeline and call it width 800. And then in here, I will set the width to be 800. Go into the state machine and convert this timeline into a blend state here. Then we need an input, so create a number input and call this width num. And we're going to set it to 1425 by default. Back to the blend state, select the input number that we just created, and then add two timelines. Set the first one to your smaller number, which is 800. And set the second one to the bigger number, which is 1425. Then select your timelines. So now, when I press play, the blend state activates, and I can increase and decrease the width of my artboard just by changing this number. But wait, this still doesn't solve the problem of increasing the height of the artboard. Well, we're going to do this in a second state machine layer. We're going to call this first one blend because this state machine layer is handling the blend state. And then we press plus, and we're going to call this artboard height. Create a new timeline. Call this height. What's it set to now? 2275. 2275. And set a keyframe. And then we're going to duplicate it and set a keyframe for what height it needs to be when it's smaller. What is that? 1492. So we'll rename this 1492. So we have two states that animate the height of the artboard. And go back into the state machine. And we'll set a condition for the entry that the width number has to be above or below a certain amount for us to activate this state. And we'll also travel between them, but first of all, we need to find out what that breakpoint number is. So press play, and we're going to decrease the number. Oh, just quickly, I'm going to add some padding around the content because I don't actually like that it has to touch the content. So let's add a little bit of padding. Go to content layer and add some padding. If you hover over the content layout, then you'll see the amount of padding that you've applied. Maybe a little bit more. Okay, that looks good. So now we'll press play again. And we'll see that the breakpoint happens when the number crosses over. Let me just decrease by 1. Okay, so the wide option is 1228 and above, and the skinnier version is below 1228. This is the height of our artboard on our wide version, so I'll set the condition that the width number needs to be equal to or above 1228. And then the skinny option, the width number needs to be below 1228. And then we'll set it up so that we can go back and forth between them. Okay, so what we have right now is a website set up with breakpoints and the artboard increases in size. Let's implement this on an actual website. So go up here and export. I will create a new folder called layouts, and I will save my layouts.riv file in layouts. Next, download VS Code and open it up. If you have no experience with coding, do not worry. I'm going to give you the code. It will be in the video description. Anyway, download and open VS Code. Then open the layouts folder that you just saved your Rive in. Over here, you should see the name of the folder and your Rive. Then create a new file just by double-clicking up here and close the welcome page. Then I want you to copy the code that I have provided and paste it in here. If you've never programmed before, do not worry about this. You won't have to change anything except a few numbers. But first of all, I need you to save, and make sure you're saving it in the layouts folder, and I want you to call it index.html and save it. Now you'll see that the index.html is saved over there in the same folder as your layouts file. Okay, I'm going to give you a quick, brief overview of the most important things that are happening in this code. The first thing is we're initializing the width of our Rive canvas. This is very important. Next, we are matching the height of the canvas to what we've set in our Rive file. We're saying if the browser width is above or equal to this number, then the canvas height should be this much. Otherwise, the canvas height should be this much. We're basically matching the exact conditions that we have in our Rive file. Simultaneously, we are taking the browser width, whatever it happens to be, and we're using that as our Rive input number. So in this way, we're controlling our Rive state machine using our browser width, and we are matching the height of the canvas in code to the height of our canvas in our Rive file. Now we're just going to go through this code and make sure the properties align with what we're trying to do in our state machine. So the first number that we need to consider is what number we're using for our breakpoint. So on line 48, go into your Rive file and make sure that this is the exact number that we're referencing. Okay, 1228. 1228, correct. Then on line 49, we're setting the height of the canvas when the website is wide. This should be the smaller of the two numbers, so let's just go into Rive and double check. The smaller number is 1492. Okay, and then what is the bigger number when our canvas is skinny? That is 2275. Okay, and now at the bottom, we're just going to double check that this is the name of our .riv. That is correct for me. We're going to make sure that this is the correct artboard name. Let me just open up Rive and double check. I'm referencing this one, yep. And just make sure that any other artboards that you're using are not also called that. Then we're going to make sure that the state machine is correct. State machine 1, I'm guessing that that is correct, yes. Same here, state machine 1. And now we need to double check that the input name is correct. That is correct. So save that. And now I want to live preview the website. To do this, you need to download an extension. The extension is called Live Preview. It's free. It's this one. You just click on it and then you click Install here. It should only take a few seconds. Then close this, go back up to the Explorer, and then over here, this is the Live Preview icon. Just click this and then your website should appear. So what's happening? I have my canvas set to this size. I cannot scroll any further down. But if I reduce the width of the website, everything rearranges just like we did in Rive, and the canvas increases in size. Now let's put this on an actual website. So let's sign up to GitHub and then create a new repository. If you've never used GitHub before, do not worry. I'm going to take you through the entire process. I'm going to call this repository Layouts, and then just go down here and create repository. Now, I know this isn't very intuitive or user-friendly, but just go over here to upload an existing file. Then choose your files, highlight both the index.html and your Rive, tap enter, then commit changes. This is our layouts repository. It's just a place where we're storing our code and our files. To show this on a web page, we simply go up to Settings, and then down here, Pages. Tap on None, and set it to Main. Then click Save. This is going to set up a GitHub page, which is a live website, to host your file. You need to refresh this page in about 3 minutes, and you'll be given a link up here. Okay, so for me, 3 minutes have passed, and I'm just going to visit the website. My files are now being hosted on GitHub. I can scroll down. Oh, there's white space either side of my footer, but let me just fix that in a second. Okay, let me just show you that this is hosted and everything's running correctly. Yep, it's changed the size of the canvas. Let's fix this white space. Okay, so it's a pretty simple solution. All you have to do is go into width 1425 and just increase it to something that you would be impossible to increase to, so like 4000 or something like that. Call this width 4000, then go into the blend state and just update that number to 4000. Then, when we press play, the black footer expands with the page. Let's export this again. Let's replace the original file. Save, replace. So before we replace anything on GitHub, let's just double check that this has worked in VS Code. See if anything goes wrong. Interesting, it's zooming out a little bit there. Let's just open this up in a port. This basically opens it up into an external browser. Okay, so I see something's going on. It's kind of like shrinking when we zoom out too far. Maybe I need to adjust the initial canvas width to be reflective of the new highest width that we can possibly go to, which is 4000. So let me just load this in a port as well. Go down to the bottom. Wider, wider, wider. Okay. Okay, so that seems to be working. Okay, cool. Okay, so on line 22, make sure you change this number to the largest number that we have in our blend state. Make sure you save this file so that there's no little circle up here. Then go to GitHub, make sure you press code up here to show you all of your files, add file, upload files, and once again just upload both of these files. Then commit changes and go back to your GitHub page. That's settings, pages, and then in about 5 minutes, click this link and the changes we made should be reflected on this website. The footer is stretching to both sides of the web page. I can reduce the size to the breakpoint and then the canvas stretches down. So that's it. This is a fully responsive website that uses a Rive file with layouts built in, which changes canvas size on the breakpoint. And yeah, that's about it.